Fresh off two straight wins of 20 or more points, the Eagles welcome back Doug Peterson as they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are in a free fall. They have started out the season 2-6, and they have already traded away a number of their pieces and are dealing with injuries to a number of other players. So this should be another game that the Eagles can win decidedly. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. Along with my co-host Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters, and today we have another great podcast for you as we are going to be previewing the matchup between the Jaguars and the Eagles. But as always, before we get to that, let's hear Eric's thoughts on the Eagles' big victory over the Bengals.
It was a beautiful sight to see because they put together, all three phases executed at a high level against a solid team who played decent for the most part. I don't sound like the Bengals completely unraveled. So I look at this as one of the first dominant wins against a legitimate team in a very long time, and that's encouraging. More importantly, you're starting to see cohesiveness amongst the units that helps me think that the Eagles will continue to progress throughout the season. And it's something we talked about in the offseason that we thought it would take maybe around 8 weeks for them to hit their stride. And now that's come to fruition. In terms of the offense, the first half, admittedly, they struggled. But once they started to get the ground game going, Hurts made a couple clutch, third down conversions. Everything just opened up for them. And they executed at a really high level. And it seems like Kellen Moore is starting to have more ownership of the offense. You're just seeing, more window dressing, more creativity, formation diversity, and all that kind of stuff, which is a welcome sight. And on the defensive side, all these guys that we pointed out as being struggling early in the season and why teams were putting up 25 plus points on them, these guys are starting to play a lot better. The defensive line is specifically across the whole unit. It seems like they're playing better. But the thing that shocked me most, Nolan Smith is actually starting to look like a legitimate pass rusher. We knew, at least on this podcast, we knew Huff was a good pass rusher is if you put him in the right position. Sweat has been solid, especially if he's not going against elite competition. But I don't think we really thought Nolan Smith had much juice. And I credited you because there were some pass rush moves that he completely eschewed early on in his career that you said would be effective. And now he's starting to put them in the game and they're working. So that's amazing. And then, Cooper DeJean. I've had a viral tweet about him on that fourth down stop following Chase. It's just simply a play I don't think Maddox is making very often. And he had a number of those plays where he's just making plays that are, I can't remember a nickel that we've had, maybe Maddox 4 or 5 years ago, that is making some of these plays and tackling. So now you're starting to see, between Bond, DeJean, we're starting to actually make a lot of these open field tackles, and that's making a big difference because we talked about it. The Bengals were going to come out and have a lot of quick game, and they did. And we were able to tackle pretty effectively underneath. Now, they did, on the first drive, continually get third downs, but you said, hey, that's not a bad thing because you're not going to convert third down and sevens 100% of the time. And once they stopped converting on third downs, they pretty much had no offense. And in the second half, I don't know, but they only scored 7 points. So very encouraging overall. If I had to nitpick anything, I would say, I can't even nitpick. So I think that's a pretty good sign going forward.
Yeah, and it's great to see. And it's, you bring up 2 points. The play that DeJean made was almost an exact replica of two of the plays that happened against the Bucs, where they were just motioning Chris Godwin to the flat. It was a play where there's nothing else you can do. The player's got to make the play, and he wasn't making those plays. They put DeJean in, and he started making those plays, right? It's those changes to the defense. Some of those little adjustments, or well, that one's a major adjustment, but there's been other little adjustments that have been made that have helped this defense throughout the season. But you mentioned Nolan Smith really starting to come along. And listen, in terms of like his juice, I think he has juice off the edge. But in terms of like his refining his technique, that's what I thought he needed to improve upon. And now we're starting to see that. That stuff comes with time, and not every player develops into that. But we're seeing that happen with Nolan Smith. And I think that's something that we probably could have seen coming, knowing that how hard of a worker that this guy was coming out of college. Like that was kind of the one of the biggest selling factors for this guy. So it's great to see him develop, but we hope to see this continue, right? Because I think Nolan Smith coming along really does give them more confidence to not have to go out and feel like they need to make one of these Robert Quinn type moves at the trade deadline. I don't know if they are going to or not, but we'll talk about some trade candidates, because it is trade season. It's something that we do have to talk about. But I want to give, as we get into the trade talks, just a little, I guess, my thesis on what they should do and just why. Number one, I put something on Twitter saying I don't think we should really go and trade for anyone. They made their trade for this year, going out and getting Jahan Dotson. Do they need to sink another asset into a player that, they might end up getting 10, 15 snaps a game? Then they take away snaps from these young guys that are developing. So you're stunting the long-term growth of the team for guys that are playing well right now. What are we truly going to be getting in return and an upgrade at this point in time? The guys that, if we have a 5th round pick, that's our latest pick at right now. So if we're trading a 5th round pick for a guy, who is a guy that we're really getting that's going to be the upgrade? I guess guys like Deontay Johnson, we're going for stuff around those picks. But even in this offense, unless you're bringing in a true stud, I don't think Jalen's looking at that player anyways. We've seen this team bring in wide receiver 3 after wide receiver 3, and they just don't really get used that much. They just fit in where they can get in. So I don't know. To me, I don't think that they should go and trade a major asset for a player, or not a major asset. Let me kind of divide my two thought processes. So if it's going to be a short-term fix, I say no. I just think it's likely a marginal player. Don't take reps away from the young guys, and the team is gelling. I will give a name. If they do want to go out and get someone, I've mentioned it in previous podcasts, Greg Dulcich. He's really started. He's not even playing with the Broncos anymore. He fell out of favor with them. He was a good athlete at tight end coming out of college. He's made plays in the NFL, but for whatever reason, Sean Payton doesn't like him. If he ends up getting traded to the Eagles, I mean, there are warning signs there. He hasn't been playing for the Broncos, so there's something going on there. Maybe it's a coach issue, maybe it's an environment issue, or maybe it's just a player issue. If the team was going to go and try and get a player around this caliber, I thought Josh Uche was the guy to go and get. And I was a little bit disappointed they didn't get him. Maybe they tried and didn't get them. But here's where I differ from what I said earlier on Twitter. If they want to go and make a long-term blockbuster move for a big-name guy, I could understand that. I could see that at that point in time. Would I do it? Probably not. But when I think and look back at the roster and the cap space that they're going to have and how many guys they have locked up for next year, you're really filling in gaps next year. They have the cap space to go and get trade for a Max Crosby and then give him the Howie treatment with how he does contracts. Look at the way the 49ers structured Nick Bosa's contract. The cap hit in his first year was $11 million, and he's the highest paid. He has the highest contract of any edge rusher in a per year value. So there's ways to structure the contract where you could fit that guy in. You are going to have to make sacrifices elsewhere, but they could do that if they wanted to. Now, you're going to have to go out and give up probably 2 first-round picks, so I wouldn't do it for that reason. But if the team really felt they needed to go out and get a guy like Max Crosby, if he is even available, because you need a team to play ball with you, then I could understand that. But I don't think they need to force a trade here. But Eric, what about you?
I agree. And actually, we talked before the podcast, and you kind of persuaded me. I sometimes wear the hat of like the Madden franchise owner, where I'm like, "Ooh, I'm just gonna make this little deal on the fringe and upgrade my team." But the main difference between Madden and real life is continuity matters. You need, like, we've seen it on the Eagles themselves. Just playing together with this new system under the new DCs, they're starting to see dramatic improvement over 8 weeks of play. So do you want to just inject someone who's like a marginally more talented player and then have to wait the rest of the season before they're even playing up to the level that the guy we have in there now is? So if I were to make a trade, I'd probably target like a veteran guy who brings some like leadership, locker room qualities, because that's more intangible and not going to necessarily like mess up anything on the field chemistry wise. A guy I've mentioned a dozen times now, Calais Campbell. Now, I don't know if the Dolphins have decided they're out on the season. That remains to be seen. But if they do, I mean, that to me, that's a great guy to have in the locker room. Just in kind of the same essence of that soup when we brought in Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh. He could come in on a couple, rundowns, be a huge guy in the middle, and then just give some wise words to our young D tackles. So yeah, beyond that, I don't really think there's any move that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and I just don't want to take away too many snaps from those young guys. So you make a great point about bringing in a guy with intangibles that doesn't necessarily need to play a bunch. He can lend some advice and some pass on that veteran presence that in that experience that he's had in the past. Now, jumping into this matchup, because this is a preview podcast, we're going to be talking about the Jags offense first. And this Jaguars offense is led by head coach Doug Peterson, although their offense coordinator is Press Taylor, who many Eagles fans definitely dislike. So, and you can kind of see it play out on the field, and a lot of fans have been validated by their dislike of him. It is led by quarterback Trevor Lawrence and headlined by names like running back Travis Etienne and rookie Brian Thomas Jr., although he is dealing with an injury, so it's kind of hard to project what this Jaguars offense is going to look like on Sunday. They're currently 21st in points per game, 14th in yards per game, and 15th in EPA per play. So, Eric, what did you see from this Jaguars offense on film? And can you really kind of project what we're going to see on Sunday with how many players that they might be out?
It's going to be extremely hard to project. And just for some transparency, we're recording this Wednesday night, and there's several guys up in the air. Most notably Brian Thomas Jr. What I saw on the field was a hot mess. I think they have a lot of talented players, pretty much across their whole offense. But I see very poor attention to detail. I see frequent miscues where the quarterback and the receivers are not on the same page. It's hard to know where to attribute the blame. This is a never-ending question of like, is it coaches or players? In my opinion, it's usually a blend of both. For the Jaguars, I do think they have coaching issues for sure. I will say this: they played Green Bay and Houston tough, like down to the wire. So this is not a team. You can look at this team and see they're 2-6 and like a bad point differential and bad advanced metrics and say, oh, they're a doormat, they're a team that sucks. I don't think that's true. I see flashes of greatness on their tape. It's just marred with horrible inconsistencies, players yelling at each other on the sidelines because they're not on the same page, lack of effort at times, and we'll talk about that more even on the defensive side. In terms of how they play, Peterson, he is coming from that Andy Reid tree, so there's a lot of the West Coast influences, but they will air it out. So much so that I think they may have like the third or fourth highest air yards per attempt in the NFL. And Lawrence is just chucking it all over the yard. The one pass will be incredible right in the breadbasket 40 yards down the field. Then the next pass will be airmailed on a simple 20-yard play where the guy's wide open. And then the next pass will be a perfect bullet and the guy just drops it out of nowhere. So I can't imagine how frustrated the fans are, because it's like, this should be working better. And we'll get more into like the players specifically, and because I do think they have quite a bit of talent, but yeah, they just are struggling to put it together. The sum is less than the parts in this case. What'd you see?
Yeah, and well, a lot of what you saw, especially the inconsistencies, right? And they can get yards and they can put up points, but are they going to do it on a consistent basis and not sputter out? And especially if you're going to be playing a team like the Eagles, I feel like we're starting to get a little bit more start a little bit better in these games, especially last game. They did move the ball on their first drive up and down the field on that first drive until penalties pushed them back. So when you play a team like the Eagles, that once they get rolling, you can't really afford to sit there and sputter throughout the game, because then once you get down and you get forced to play one dimensional, it's going to be tough to come back against a team like us. So when you add into the fact that they are probably gonna be without. I think they're probably gonna be without Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's limited in practice right now. They have the practice jersey on him. The yellow. I don't know what color they use when we were in college. When I was in college, we used the yellow jerseys. That was a non-contact jersey, meant you could go run routes on air. But he's dealing with a chest or a rib injury. That shit's painful, man. If you take a hit there, that's gonna be tough, and especially when you're trying to move and twist and turn when your core is hurt, that is hard to play. So even if he does play, I think he's going to be more of a decoy. And really, what I think is going on right now is they're using him. They're throwing him out there in this news that he's limited. I think it's going to be more of like they're trying to make the Eagles have to think and game plan and prepare for that. They need to try and win on the margins any way they can, because they're just not good enough right now to keep up with solid teams like the Eagles. So, but it is going to be hard to gauge what we're going to see for this team on the field, because Brian Thomas Jr. may or may not play, but Christian Kirk's definitely out. Gabe Davis, their other receiver, is also wearing a non-contact jersey during practice. They ended the game with their fourth and fifth string receivers having to play against the Packers. And once the fourth quarter came, they played exclusively 12 personnel because they had no one else to throw out there. So I do think we're going to see a lot more 12 personnel this game. I think we're going to see this offense run through Evan Engram and the running backs. Whether that's on the ground or through the air. I'd also expect their backup tight end, Brenton Strange, to play a lot. And the reason why, at a certain point in time, when you are going to be potentially playing with your fourth and fifth, and then now your practice squad receivers on the team, at a certain point in time, you just got to put your best players on the field. And your best players is probably going to be your second tight end as opposed to your sixth receiver. So I think they'll probably end up playing more 12 personnel. Now, I think that plays right into the Eagles' hands, and the fact that when they can come out and base, they are a big and physical team, and I think they will get after that Jacksonville offensive line, especially when we haven't even talked about the fact that both their starting guards didn't practice today. So, and they both got banged up in the game previously, so I think it's a little bit more than just a rest day, something we're going to have to pay attention to. But I do think Trevor Lawrence's legs are going to come into play, just for the fact that once you start putting in a bunch of different players, guys aren't going to be running the offense as efficiently, and they already struggle with that stuff as is. And I'll add this. Trevor Lawrence has a 1% scramble rate when not under pressure. That's 36th out of 43 quarterbacks, 36th lowest. That's 10.3% scramble rate when under pressure. So that's 17th out of 43. So if you get pressure on him, and I think this is a game that he's probably going to be pressured a little bit more than usual, then he'll probably have to run a little bit more. And I think they're just going to try and use his legs in general. But overall, I think this team's going to struggle moving the ball consistently. They can hit some big chunk plays here or there, but I think it's going to take long drives. And when you got a lot of backup players, it's inconsistent play, wrong routes, bad timing, sloppy offense. Trevor will likely be forced to hold on to the ball longer, which will lead to more sacks, which will lead to longer down and distance, which leads to more pressure, more sacks, which leads to more turnovers. It's just a bad situation that the Jaguars are in right now. There should be a game where the Eagles come out and dominate on defense. But let's jump into some of these players. Specifically, we touched on him, Trevor Lawrence, and just illustrate this a little bit more. He's doing a really good job of getting the ball out of his hands quickly. He's currently tied for 7th lowest in time to throw, despite having the 3rd highest average depth of target. So he's getting the ball out quick, but he's chucking it deep. Is he going to be able to continue doing that when Brian Thomas isn't playing, or if he's not playing, or when Christian Kirk's not playing, or Gabe Davis isn't playing? Brian Thomas Jr. actually has the lowest average depth of target of those 3 players. So, and it's still really high. I think that kind of explains what their offense is right now. Christian Kirk, their slot receiver, has a higher average depth of target than Brian Thomas Jr. And it's over 13 point yards per target. So the average depth of target probably comes down without their top 3 receivers. But even so, they're tied for 30th in completion percentage, tied for 22nd in turnover-worthy throws. He's tied for 18th in on-target throw percentage and tied for 30th in adjusted completion percentage. So he will hit big plays, but he will struggle and put his team behind the sticks as well. And like you said, when he does complete passes, sometimes those passes are getting dropped as well. So it's a struggle bus for them right now. What anything else to add about Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of late career Brett Favre, where one play you'll be blown away, like that walk-off touchdown he had as a Viking, and then the next you're like, what is he thinking? Like when he threw that game-sealing interception to the Eagles. Every throw, it seems like it's an adventure for him. The ball comes out with velocity and a tight spiral. So he's a little bit of an enigma. I don't really know how his career will transpire. I could see him, like, if he somehow went to another organization that was better run, that he could start to come into that elite territory. But on the trajectory he's on with that organization, it's looking rough. I would single out Tank Bigsby, the backup running back. He brings an element that Etienne doesn't, which is he runs extremely hard, and you can see it charges up the whole team. In fact, he might just be a better overall player. At least what I've seen on the field this year, he looks better. So you don't want to just let him get going. He's also capable of breaking off big runs. I do think earlier in the year he had like a 70-yard run. And it'll be a huge question about if Brian Thomas is there. If he is, this is the kind of guy where you have to be aware of where he is on any given play. He's tall, extremely fast, tracks the ball well, and his hands look good. Going back to college, one of his red flags is he had an extremely late breakout. But I think now with just the nature of NIL and how these guys are developing in college, we're going to start to see more of that. Maybe it's less of a red flag because the film looked really good. And now we see stepping straight on to the NFL field and looking like, probably a top 20 receiver. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on the injury report. This is not an offense that I'm taking lightly. This is not the Browns. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't take any team lightly. I wouldn't go in the NFL, going into it. But I still think this is a team that they should be able to come out and handle. When they're able to corral and hold down Jamar Chase, they should be able to do the same thing against this offense, against Brian Thomas Jr. If he does play, they should be able to have a much better. They're probably going to get more pressure on Trevor Lawrence than they did on Joe Burrow. Although having said that, Lawrence does get the ball out of his hands quick. But again, if you're rotating in a bunch of new pieces and they're running wrong routes and the timing's not correct, things start to break down. The quarterback has to hold the ball a lot longer. But you're absolutely right about Bigsby. The Eagles are going to have to be ready to tackle this guy. He's going to break tackles. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He will break tackles. He's forcing a missed tackle on 38.8% of runs. That's second in the NFL right now. And like you said, he just runs physical and hard and angry. So they'll have to make sure they're getting multiple guys to the ball. When you see guys missing tackles and he's breaking tackles, just understand these guys get paid too. He is really good at doing this. What's important is making sure you pursue to the ball and getting multiple people there. And ideally, trying to stop this guy before he gets started in the backfield is going to be one of the most important things. But Etienne's a good pairing to Bigsby's power, right? With a little bit, he's a better receiver. He's a little bit shiftier. So, it's a good pairing to add. But he is coming off a hamstring injury. He's limited today, the first day in practice. Hamstring guys with hamstring injuries and are limited in practice. To me, that's not a good sign. Those injuries can nag. It's great to see for him that he's getting back into practice, but I'd still be paying attention if he is going to be playing. But they're going to have to definitely look out for Evan Engram. He's an excellent receiving tight end. He was a target hog last year. His 114 receptions last season was second by a tight end in history. Number one was 2018 Zach Ertz. So I think this kind of goes to show you Doug Peterson likes throwing to his tight ends, right? So he will be Trevor Lawrence's security blanket, especially with all these guys out. They'll need to make sure that they have a game plan to take him away, especially on third downs. Now, moving on to the trenches and who is blocking Jalen Carter. And I don't know because I don't know who's playing. If it should be Brandon Scherf at right guard, and if healthy, he is a good player. Now, he has had injuries throughout his career that have added up and probably have taken away from the player that he ultimately could have become. But at the end of the day, he has allowed 0 sacks this year. His pressure rate allowed is 8th out of 72 qualifying guards. And so part of that helps when Trevor Lawrence is getting the ball out of his hands quickly. But this is going to be something we're going to need to pay attention to throughout the week, because if he's not playing, they're going to have to go to their backup guard. And when you look at the fact that their other guard, Ezra Cleveland, who the Eagles were able to give some trouble last year when they played the Vikings, he might be out as well. So they might be down to their third and fourth guards at that point in time. And that is not going to be a good mix for Trevor Lawrence. And then you add to that, the best part of their offensive line is the interiors. They just traded away one of their left tackles. The reason why, he wasn't very good. He was rotating in with their backup tackle, who is now stepping in. Walker Little is a player that is taking over for Cam Robinson. He is 55th out of 78 qualifying tackles on pressure rate. The other tackle, Anton Harris, 48 out of 78 qualifying tackles on pressure rate. So if we're going to get pressure, number one, I think we should be able to get pressure from the interior, especially if they are injured. But I think we should be able to see a good amount of pressure from the edges, from Nolan Smith and Huff and Sweat and BG. I think they should be able to get after Trevor a little bit. But do you want to add anything else before we jump over to the defense? Or excuse me, the Eagles' defensive game plan?
Yeah, it seems like in recent weeks, you're not really noticing Carter, and he's getting a ton of attention from the other team's offensive line, which is great. And Fangio has responded by saying, okay, we're going to get pressure with our linebackers. We've seen Dean and Bond at times come in scot-free. Yeah, and then using those simulated or creeper pressure looks to get a guy in off the edge. Now, if teams start to see like, oh, we got to be vigilant about Dean coming screaming up the A gap, and then Carter gets a few more one-on-ones, then we could see him start to get some sacks. So overall, this is something I harped on after the Atlanta game, is I'm keeping an eye on this pass rush. I think the defense pretty much will live and die on their effectiveness, and it's just been very encouraging to see the ways they've been able to drum up pressure lately.
Yeah, Jalen Carter could have had 2 sacks last week if it wasn't for Burrow getting the ball out of his hands right away. So I wouldn't worry too much about Jalen Carter. He is still making plays. The sacks are going to come. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And the teams are having to respect who Jalen Carter is. And there's a reason why I mention this every week. They have to sit there and game plan and think, what are we going to do about this guy? Because if not, they don't have a plan for him. He will wreck the game if you don't have a guard that can match up with him. Now, moving to the Eagles' defensive game plan, I think that the game plan that they should use is going to be pretty similar to what we saw last week with the Bengals. When you look at Trevor Lawrence's and really the Jaguars offense, the coverages that they have struggled against the most has been man coverage. So I think that's something that we can run back again. And when you look at the fact that they're probably going to have a lot of backup players in, and even if Brian Thomas plays, he's probably going to be limited in his effectiveness, you can man up and lock up on those guys more and not allow the quarterback to have quick, easy throws. Do they like to throw deep? Yes, but are they going to be able to do that with a bunch of guys that aren't good receivers or good players? I do think they have a guy, Parker Washington, who he will make plays if you allow him to, but these guys aren't just going out there and dusting guys, So I think you can go out there and play man coverage against this team. They'll struggle even more than they already do when playing man coverage. And by playing man coverage, we know that this team is going to come out and want to try and run the ball, rotate a safety into the box. Or to be honest, they've been defending the run well, rotating safeties late into the box. So I'm not saying they even have to do that, but if it becomes a thing where they are struggling to run a little bit, maybe Tank Bigsby is breaking tackles and we need to get guys a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage to help out, then I think that's something that we can do. And that'll pair well with playing cover 1. What I don't think they should do is play cover 3 a bunch because Trevor Lawrence tears that up. So I'd rather play more man coverage. But at the end of the day, the game plan should be this. Don't give up big plays because they will fuck up. So make them work. They were 29th in third down percentage. They will screw up on their own and get themselves off the field. Don't give up a bunch of chunk plays. They will give you the ball back. But Eric, what were your thoughts on how the Seagulls defense should attack?
It's highly based on who actually plays. And just to touch on that real quick, I think Christian Kirk's one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. Extremely good deep threat. Obviously, Brian Thomas as well. Now, so this is a trend I've been keeping my eye on. The Eagles' usage of like too high has skyrocketed in recent weeks compared to what we saw early in the year. They're now running quarters at the 9th highest rate in the NFL. Now, there are different charting services, but this is coming kind of like an aggregate of a few, so I trust it. And to the 3rd best success rate in those looks. Now, you mentioned it. When the Jags were healthy, they're taking all these deep shots. So I was like, okay, we can just sit in quarters and that should be pretty good. But if it turns out that they're going to just target Evan Engram 15 times, that's completely unnecessary. Lean into the man coverage. The Eagles have looked good in man coverage in recent weeks. So maybe you just bracket Engram and let the Jags beat themselves like you mentioned. That's kind of what my plan would be.
Yeah, now jumping into the other side of the ball, looking at this Jaguars defense, it's led by defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen, who was a hot name in coaching searches this past offseason coming from Atlanta. It's headlined by names like Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. They're currently 30th in points per game, 29th in yards per game, and 31st in EPA per play. So what did you see from this defense? Because those numbers are definitely a lot worse than what we saw from the offense.
Yeah. So it's one of these things where when you're looking across all the advanced metrics, you don't want to be on the extremes unless you're a really good team like the Vikings. They're running all kinds of wild coverages and fronts that other teams aren't doing it to an extremely high level. They have the personnel, the coaching, and the continuity to pull that off. The Jags, they're on the opposite end of that spectrum where they're running extremely high rates of man coverage. They're running by far the most cover 2. They blitz less than anyone in the NFL, and it's not working. Now, we'll talk about why I think they're probably better than perception related to some of their missing guys, some key guys from their defense. But just in terms of their scheme, they're not doing themselves any favors. If I had a team that was like very injured, had a talent deficit, I wouldn't just sit back and let teams pick apart my bad defensive backs, and I'm getting no pressure for 2 years now. So I would probably try something more aggressive that we're just not really seeing that from them. So I'm not impressed, although they are to the extreme. So it's clear that they're like trying something. It's not like they're just vanilla across the board, but what they're trying isn't really working. How about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were just like you said, a pretty bland and basic team. Really, like you said, ton of cover 1, ton of cover 2, no blitzing, very little sim pressures, very little stunts. It's really a defense that just kind of lines up and plays, and there's merits to that, especially if you got a fast team. If you have good players that are fast and physical and can fly to the ball, well, yeah, you can sit there and play single high all game, and then rotate in cover 2 as your changeup and let your guys just play free and not have to think too much. But if they're not that good, you're going to need to give them some other answers. And they have some issues that they're struggling with. They've also traded away one of their defensive tackles. And so they're not getting pressure up the middle very well. They can get some pressure from the edges, from Trayvon Walker and from Josh Hines-Allen. Man, it's going to take me a minute to get that name right. So they can get some pressure from those guys. But listen, if you can't get pressure up the middle ever, quarterbacks can just step up around in front of your edge rushers, So I don't think, looking at the scheme, it's doing them any favors. Like you said, this should be a game where the Eagles are able to play whatever game plan that they want to play and be comfortable doing what they want to do. And I think what's probably going to be a big issue for them, as long as this Jaguars offense is going to be banged up, is the fact that what we saw with the Saints defense, when the Saints offense got extremely decimated by injuries, now all of a sudden their defense is on the field a bunch, and then they're tired and they're gassed and they can't tackle guys and they can't stop the run. I feel like this could be a similar situation with this Jaguars defense going up against the Eagles. We're a team that can control the clock and play any type of style of offense that we want to play. And if they're going to be tired because their offense is sputtering and can't put together and sustain long drives, this defense is going to constantly be back out on the field. And the good old quote, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Once you're tired, it doesn't matter how good you are. You're going to get your ass pushed around. So it's something to pay attention to. But looking at these defensive player matchups, Josh Hines-Allen is their best player on defense. He had 17 and a half sacks last season. He got a max contract in the offseason. Currently has 3 sacks this season. He's 24th in pressure rate. He's a well-rounded edge rusher with great traits. I think he's their best player, despite the fact that Trayvon Walker has 6.5 sacks. I think Josh Hines-Allen is more disruptive on a down-to-down basis than Trayvon Walker. Now, the thing is, he is going to be rushing against Fred Johnson this week. Trayvon Walker will be going against Lane Johnson, so I'm not too worried about that matchup. But looking at Hines-Allen against Fred Johnson, that's going to be a matchup to watch again. But when we saw what happened with Trey Hendrickson, I got a feeling they're going to run back a very, very, very similar game plan this week because it worked extremely well last week. But what were your thoughts on these two edge rushers?
Yeah, I saw a very surprising stat that showed that their pass rush win rate was roughly 30th in the NFL. And then I went back and looked at last year and they were 29th. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, okay, you got Josh Hines-Allen, who I've thought is an incredible player. Walker, who was like first overall. How is it possible that their pass rush win rate is this bad? And, if you get nothing from the interior, and then you have Walker, who, although he has had sacks, a lot of his pass rush attempts come up completely empty. That's what you get. Then that's going to be dangerous for them. If you can't get a pass rush and you don't blitz, that's going to be like a field day for Hurts. So it's looking pretty good. Now, I don't think we should get overconfident. Yes, Johnson handled Hendrickson really good, even when he was one-on-one. I do think Hines-Allen brings a little bit of a different element with pure power that could be an issue, collapsing the pocket. But there may just be easy escape lanes anyway, if no one else is getting pressure. So it's not something that I'm paranoid about going into the game.
Yeah, it hasn't been an issue all year. I mean, if you look at Jalen's pressure numbers, they are fairly high. He also holds the ball a long time as well, so he invites some of that himself. But even though he's had high pressure rate numbers, it hasn't really been a huge issue for this team for much of the year. Just interesting to see where they ranked versus other teams and just how they've ended up scoring and moving the balls regardless. Trayvon Walker, I mean, he's just a kind of streaky rusher. He's going to run through you. And if he can't run through you, he's probably not getting a lot of sacks. Every now and again, he'll win around the edge or he'll beat you on a stunt, but it's just a lot of power that he's using right now. And he was kind of a raw player coming out of college. He was a physical specimen, a physical freak for sure, but he still hasn't put it all together right now. And that's why he's more of a streaky edge rusher. So when you have a guy like Josh Hines-Allen and then you have the rest of the pass rush unit really isn't that great. And they went out and got Eric Armstead. He hasn't been what they hoped he would be, back from his time with the 49ers. And I think they're pulling snaps away from him. He didn't play that many snaps last game. They put in some other players, and they weren't even young players that is like, oh, we're going to get a look at these guys. There are 2 players that were like 30 years old and 27 years old. So it's interesting to think about. But if only one guy's consistently generating pressure, and it really only was Josh Hines-Allen, you're not going to have a high pressure rate from the rest of your team. It's very similar to what the Bengals are dealing with. But looking at their secondary, Tyson Campbell is back, and he is their best corner. But overall, their secondary isn't that great. Their other corners aren't great. Ronald Darby is probably going to be starting on the opposite end of Tyson Campbell. They do have a rookie, Jarian Jones, who really he popped in my model, my corner model before the draft, but I didn't love the film, so I never really touched on him. But he's playing well right now, and he's popping again in the models as well. Or for a rookie, I would say he is. But at the end of the day, even if with Tyson Campbell back, they play a ton of man coverage. AJ Brown is Tyson Campbell's not stopping AJ Brown. And whoever the other corners are going to be matching up against Devontae aren't stopping them either. It's a fool's errand if they're going to run out there and think that they can play man coverage all game long against this team. But what do you think about this secondary, Eric?
I think getting Campbell back was a huge boost to them. The guys they were trotting out there were terrible. I think the safeties, Cisco has some talent and he plays with his hair on fire, but he's just been playing reckless, getting in fights with teammates, blown assignments. A little bit like the Gardner Johnson at the beginning of the year that we were being critical about him. Darnell Savage is pretty much cooked, kind of like what we saw out of Geno Stone last week. So, yeah, I mean, you could throw it anywhere you want on the secondary. I wouldn't necessarily throw a bunch at Campbell just because the rest of that unit is so weak. So it's like, why? But it's not like he's so good that you have to stay away from him. So, yeah, really rough secondary overall.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they come out and play. They're almost going to have to force to play a lot of cover one or a lot of at least single high coverages because they're going to have to come out there and stop the run against the Eagles. And honestly, the Jaguars have been a bit of a pass funnel if you look at how teams attack them. They've been better against the run than they have against the pass, but it's just hard for me to see teams that are really stopping this Eagles running attack right now. The Browns did the best job at that, but at a certain point in time, it started to break down and it started to wear down, and then the Eagles were able to attack them in other ways. That's the beauty of having a balanced offense. They can beat you in multiple different ways. I will say this though, even though they are a pass funnel defense, I still think this Eagles team has been below a 40% pass rate since they've come out of the bye week. That is extremely low. That's got to be historically low. If someone wants to look up those numbers, but so I don't think they're going to come out and just start tossing it around the yard with a whole bunch of attempts, especially with knowing the Jaguars offense, how they're going to be playing. But I do think that they will be efficient throwing the ball. So it might be a 20 attempt game from Jalen Hurts and he still might hit over 200 yards. So it'll be something to see. But in terms of Jalen Hurts passing props, my models say he should hit the over, but I'm a little concerned about how much they actually truly run in this game. So I'm off on Jalen Hurts passing props. But looking at this Eagles defensive or offensive game plan, how would you attack this Jaguars defense?
For me, and real quick, I just want to touch on their linebackers. They have a series of guys they'll play. They just got Oluokun back, and he's kind of the green dot leader of that defense. He's a solid player. Devin Lloyd, to me, he's like Patrick Queen, where if he was in a perfect situation, I think he'd actually be good, but he has way too many lapses right now. And then they've got Ventrell Miller and Chad Muma. So overall, I actually think they're a pretty talented linebacker unit. I thought that was worth mentioning because we'll see those guys out on the field. They play a bunch of linebackers, a lot of snaps. But in terms of my offensive game plan, it would just be a balanced attack. Of like you mentioned on the other side of the ball, they don't need to do anything crazy. Avoid turnovers, make their defense make plays, like tackle you when you throw it underneath. You don't need to do anything to reinvent the wheel. If we just manage the possessions, they're gonna beat themselves. The Jaguars are gonna beat themselves on offense, and they're gonna make mistakes on defense, and they're gonna be out talented. So I don't have any kind of like grand scheme to try to eviscerate them. If they do end up running a ton of man coverage, well, we have infinity man coverage beaters. Just have Devontae and AJ run whatever route. And if they don't blitz, then you'll have even more time to complete any of those downfield plays that we like to run as well.
Yeah. And good point about bringing up the blitz. I want to touch on this with Jalen Hurts because I'm going to start getting into more talking about giving out numbers for you guys and for the gambling perspective. When you look at Jalen Hurts, his scrambling rates and his numbers, they're way lower this year in terms of his non-pressured scramble rates, his pressured scramble rates. He's hanging in the pocket a lot more, and you're seeing his rushing numbers start to come down. Also, on top of that, because he's not being a more physical player when he's running, when playoff Jalen comes out, he'll be a more physical runner, but not during the regular season. But he also his lowest scramble rate. He has the lowest scramble rate against cover one because when he knows where he's going with the ball, he's not sitting there and getting into these situations where he's starting to second guess himself. When he knows I got one-on-one with AJ Brown, the ball comes out quick and he's confident with it. He doesn't end up scrambling a lot. And then you look at a team that doesn't get a lot of pressure. He's probably going to have time to throw, facing a lot of cover one. I don't think if I'd like to see what these numbers are going to be for Jalen Hurts under props, but I'll probably take the under on his rushing. But it depends on the number. I have to see what Vegas comes out there with. But like you said, this game's about us. It's how I would be approaching this, and my message to the team would be: this game is about us. It's not about them, because like you said, they will beat themselves. We just have to go out there and not beat ourselves. Don't turn the ball over. Don't make stupid penalties. Right? Just mental mistakes. Make sure everyone's on the same page. No freelancing in your pass rush lane integrities. I know we're talking about defense or offense right now, but just overall for the team, play your game. Do what you do because they have more talent. They are the better team. They should win this game, right? But in terms of some things that they should do, their run game plan that they've used against stacked boxes has been good. The way that they've been able to manipulate and either force a corner or the nickel, the slot corner to fit into the run and remove a linebacker. I think that's been a huge boost for them. And a way that they've been able to run the ball against teams that continue to try and stack the boxes at the highest rates that they have done for the entire season. I expect that the Jaguars are going to do that this game. They already are a team that stacks the box at a high rate, just playing cover one as much as they do. So a lot of the things we've seen from the run game, we're going to continue to see those same things. I'll add into that as well. They play a lot of cover one and then a lot of cover two. Pretty much the coverages they use. So I would have split field concepts. So you got your cover one side and then you got your cover two side that you're going to go with. This isn't every play, obviously, but when you're trying to get into your 3-step, 5-step drop back passing attack, I'd use that a lot. But they are a little bit predictable, and when they're going to rotate to cover two, a lot of times it's on long down and distance. So you get to second down, second and long, third and long, they're going to play a lot of cover two. They oftentimes rotate it so you don't know who is going to be the deep half player, who's going to be like the middle pull runner. So that is something that you have to make sure you're processing post-snap and not just throwing it into the coverage. But I trust Jalen's going to be fine with that. There was a beautiful play against the Bengals last week where they ran a dig to AJ Brown over the middle from the boundary. Great cover two beater. I expect to see that same exact play again this week when we play the Jaguars. But as we wrap this up, Eric, what do you have for a score prediction?
I think it has the makings of a trap game, to be honest with you. The Jaguars are having a fire sale. Their record's horrible. The product they're putting on the field is bad. And so it's so easy for the Eagles coming off this big win to start to look past them. And what I think it will materialize as is a slow start, which we've become accustomed to this season. Maybe the Jaguars get up 10-0, but they're simply better than the Jaguars by enough to make up for even a slow start. So I ultimately have the Eagles winning 24-17. What's your game prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I like that you brought up the trap game, the narrative of the trap game. And I think, that can exist to some degree, but if you got good leadership, and I think this team right now is just, they are playing and they're focused and they have a mission and a goal. I love the chip on the shoulder that they're playing with right now. I think Zach Berman tweeted it. They opened up with the Mike Jones song back then.
That year they didn't want me, now I'm hot, they all on me.
Pretty much talking about, you didn't want us when we were down. Don't join us when we're hot. They got a chip on their shoulder. And I think that was directed partly towards the fans because, you know what? We can be assholes sometimes. We can be a little bit quick to the trigger sometimes, right? So I feel like this team is really committed and has a goal and a vision. You can feel the energy with this team that I don't think they're going to let these trap games come and affect them, right? And to add to that, things that prevent trap games from happening is when you can just beat people up in the trenches. That stuff travels. That stuff continues. Football is a different sport than having a trap game and a game like basketball, where you're playing so many days. You're not having someone that's trying to give you a fucking concussion, where you have to make sure you're on your P's and Q's. Because if you come out there and are looking towards next week, well, you're going to get your clock cleaned. When you put on that helmet and you strap up those pads, there is no trap game. You have to make sure you're going out there and playing your game plan, and you are being physical and being a tough defense. And that is what this team is. They are physical in the trenches on both sides of the ball. So I think this is a game they come out and they really work the Jags. I think it's going to be a game that we come out and we're able to put our backups in midway through the fourth quarter. That's my prediction. So I do think it is going to be more of a lower scoring game just because of the nature of both offenses, how I think the Jags are going to have to attack with. They're probably going to have to be a dink and dunk offense. I don't think they're going to be able to push the ball down the field that much. The Eagles, they're under 40% pass rate right now coming out of the bye week. I think that's going to continue with this game plan. They're going to come out and want to be a run-heavy team, and I think they're going to be able to do that. So I don't think it's going to be a super high-scoring game. I think it's going to be a low-play total. So it's going to be harder to hit and run up the score in games like that. But I think the Eagles should still be able to hit on some explosive plays. I do think the Jags will be able to get a few explosive plays here and there. I think Tank Bigsby will break off a run, break some tackles here and there, and break off a run to flip the field every now and again. So I'll give the Jags 13, but I make it 28-13 Eagles. And hopefully we will be back next week with another victory pod. Hopefully we don't beat them up too bad where Doug Peterson is unemployed, because I still love my boy Dougie P. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.